Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Rubin with Writer Spark Academy with online learning and resources for writers. Today, I'm talking about deep point of view. Deep point of view is a technique that moves the reader so far into a character's head that they are completely engrossed. It is, in my opinion, the surest means to grab your reader's attention and to keep it, which is what we want. It's also sometimes called limited third, and that means that you, the reader, and the writer are only in one person's head through an entire scene, and the reader then sees everything through that person's lens. There are 4 steps needed when establishing deep point of view, but before we go there, let's back up and talk about showing versus telling. When an author writes in deep point of view, they are showing, they are not telling. The author uses all the sensory details, what the character sees, tastes, feels, smells, etc. But more than that, the narrative goes into the point of view character's mind, showing exactly how he or she feels and what he or she is thinking. It also helps to develop voice because deep point of view avoids what is called author intrusion. So this means that there are no or very few he thoughts, she thoughts, I thought, I could see, he felt, things like that. The narrative goes straight to the thought or to the sight or to the feeling. So the author's not telling us what that character is feeling, they're showing us. It's the difference between saying, for example, what the devil is the guy going to do, he thought to himself, versus what the devil was the guy doing. Which one has us right there in the character's mind? Hopefully, you said the second example. We also want to take a look at scene structure. In order to really understand deep point of view, we do need to understand scene structure as well. Scene structure builds on a character's goal, motivation, and conflict, and it ends with disaster. This can be simplified by saying that a scene is made up of a series of stimuli, and response or responses. One thing happens, which then leads to or facilitates a response or a reaction, and that happens over and over. When the phone rings, someone answers it, or acknowledges it, or chooses to ignore it. That's a response. If the doorbell rings, same thing. Someone is going to answer it, look through the peephole, ignore it. That's the response. So you have a stimulus and a response. But you can't have a scene with just stimulus and response because that would fall very, very flat. Without the action and the character's thoughts about that action, we have no context for the scene. We don't know what people are doing, what they're feeling, what they're thinking. This is when we start to go deep. All right, so here we go. The 4 steps to establishing deep point of view are adding emotion, thought, decision, and action. So here is a progression of those 4 steps in kind of a hypothetical scene. So a character grabs a sword. That's a decision. He thinks, what am I going to do with this sword? That's a thought. The stomach clenches. That's an emotional reaction, so an emotion. And then he wields the sword. That's an action. So that's a progression. I think it would work a lot better if we changed the order around a little bit and have the stomach clench first, so showing an emotion. And then he or she sees a sword and thinks, what am I going to do with that? That's the thought. And then the sword is grabbed, that's the decision. And then the sword is wielded, that's the action. So put into a narrative, it might read something like this. And here's the stimulus. He heard footsteps marching down the hall. His stomach clenched. The sword lay on a table, the blade gleaming, beckoning to him. What was he supposed to do with that? He'd never had training. The footsteps stopped outside the door and he grabbed the damn weapon, readying himself for whatever he was about to face. So all of that is the response. We have the stimulus of the footsteps, and the response is everything else, which incorporates those 4 elements. Those elements don't always have to go in the same order, and you do not have to use all of them all the time. So here's another example. And I'm showing this in various stages leading up to when we get to deep point of view. So here we go with the bare bones. Margie heard the chiming of the doorbell. That's the stimulus. Racing to the door, she unhooked the latch and pulled the door open. That's her response. Hi, Bob. What are you doing today? She asked. Another stimulus. His response, nothing special. He motioned with his measuring cup. I wondered if you had a cup of sugar I could borrow. That's another stimulus. And the response is, oh, sure. She turned back towards her kitchen. Okay, there's nothing super exciting about that. What's lacking is a lot of detail and emotion. It's telling. Let's take that same scenario and add thought and decision. Margie heard the chiming of the doorbell. Not 2 seconds before, she'd seen Bob leave his house with a small cup in his hands. It was probably her neighbor. Racing to the door, she unhooked the latch and pulled it open. Hi, Bob. What are you doing today? She asked. Nothing special. He motioned with his measuring cup. I wondered if you had a cup of sugar I could borrow. At least he wanted something sweet from her. Oh, sure. She turned back towards her kitchen. This is a better passage. It includes thoughts and decisions. But now let's go deeper still by adding emotion. Margie heard the chiming of the doorbell. Not 2 seconds before, she'd seen Bob leaving his house with a small cup in his hands. Her breath caught. Could it be her hunky neighbor? Racing to the door, she unhooked the latch and pulled the door open. Hi, Bob. What are you doing today? She asked. Nothing special. He motioned with his measuring cup. I wondered if you had a cup of sugar I could borrow. Deflated, her shoulders sank. At least he wanted something sweet from her. Oh, sure. She turned back towards her kitchen. This passage is much stronger. The key is showing the emotion. The final step, then, to get into deep point of view is to remove everything telling. And here we go. The doorbell chimed and Margie spilled the coffee she was pouring. Not 2 seconds before, she'd seen Bob leave his house with a small cup in his hands. Her breath caught. Could it be her hunky neighbor? She set the coffee pot back on the burner so fast the dark liquid sloshed over the side. Hell's bells! She ran her hand over her rumpled pajamas, tightened her ponytail, and raced to the door. Unhooking the latch, she prayed he thought the tousled look was sexy. Hi, Bob. She rushed, her voice a little winded from the Olympian vault to the front door. She really needed to say no to the Oreo gods more often. What's up? Nothing special. He flashed a sheepish grin, though her gaze didn't linger on his face. No, as always, it traveled south. Jeans low on his hips, his signature black t-shirt, bare feet. Now that's how you rock the tousled look. He really was too good looking to be allowed to roam in the wild like this. He motioned with his measuring cup, dipping his head a little to get her attention. I wondered if you had a cup of sugar I could borrow. His tone was warm, but not flirty. Deflated, her shoulders sank. He didn't seem as enamored with her little Snoopy shorts and tea as she'd hoped. Oh, sure, come on in. He followed her into the kitchen, and she couldn't help adding a little extra swing with her hips. So, by showing the thoughts, emotions, decisions, actions, the stimulus and response series, the scene comes alive. You can also see how much longer it is. Building in these four elements expands the scene automatically. Here's another example. This is one from one of my magical dressmaking mysteries. Her pudgy cheeks had gone ruddy and her hair seemed a little more wild than it had the night before. She looked like a kid in a candy store. Come on, she said, you can tell me. The flowers are on the body. When I started taking pictures, they were small. But by the time I was done, she clicked an arrow on the laptop and another picture popped up. By the time I was done, she continued, they looked like this. The laptop sat between us. She ran her index finger over the touchpad and tapped it with her fingers a few times. She brought her gaze up and spun the computer around to face me. Was that a smile tickling her lips? My breath caught in my throat for an instant, and I lost track of what Madeline was saying. My mother's green thumb had gotten the better of her, and Madeline Brighton had caught the evidence on film. I thought I'd stopped her from making the weeds and flowers sprout, but I must have missed one. I've never seen anything like it, Madeline said, tapping the screen with the pad of her finger. The rumors are true, aren't they? I sat a little straighter in my chair. Rumors were never good, ever. I don't know what you mean. Okay, notice that the deep point of view here eliminates the need to italicize the internal dialogue. It's implied. And here's one more quick example. This one is telling with no deep POV. Lori walked through the fairgrounds. She thought she could hear footsteps coming up behind her. It occurred to her that the midway was deserted. She didn't know where the people had gone. Now, here is that same passage expanded and using deep point of view by showing. Lori hurried through the fairgrounds. The tap, tap, tap of footsteps rung in her ears. Her imagination? She tripped over her high heels. Stupid to wear pumps to a fair. What had she been thinking? Panic pricked her skin. She should have listened to Ryan. He'd said it was a ruse, a scam. Who in their right mind would demand a meeting at a fairground? And where the hell had all the people gone? She picked up her pace. Turning around wasn't an option. So the first example doesn't go into deep point of view. It has thought tags and other things that create distance, but the second one does, and it's so much more engaging. So interweaving the different elements into a scene and eliminating thought tags helps you get deeper into the character as if the reader is in the character's mind. The reader feels what the character feels. The reader sees and hears and tastes and smells everything the character sees, hears, tastes, and smells. The reader isn't pulled away by tags. No distance is created. We are right there with the character.